Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome for the West Coast out in California today. My name is Laura Dorman. I actually run our diversity, equity, inclusion, and our charitable giving here at Litify. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon, as I should say. I want to welcome Lecia Brooks. We are so thrilled to have you here today. Lecia is the Chief of Staff at Southern Poverty Law Center, doing amazing things for us. You can watch us here live on LinkedIn, or you can also check us out on Facebook. We're also on YouTube, and you can also check us out on our own website, litify.com/Liticast. Lecia, warm welcome to you today. You run all of the diversity and inclusion for your organization. You work with leadership to ensure that there's continuity in terms of the plans that you're doing, the changes you're making, sustainable infrastructure. I'm going to kick it right off this morning and ask you, can you talk a little bit about what you guys do and what your mission and initiatives are?
First, thanks so much for having me. It's a thrill and a pleasure to be here. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. And I hope that we can learn some things together, as we move forward as a nation. The Southern Poverty Law Center, for those that don't know, I'm in Montgomery, Alabama. We were founded in 1971, so we're just about 50 years old. And our mission is we're dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to standing up and representing the most vulnerable members in our society. We do that through litigation, education, and other forms of advocacy. We began as a really small civil rights law firm, and we grew out of the civil rights movement. Our founders really wanted to continue the work that was done by the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, especially relative to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we began by suing the state of Alabama to implement the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And now, almost 50 years later, we've grown to be almost 350 people in 5 states across the Deep South. In addition to Alabama, we're in Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, and of course here. We also have a small office in Washington, D.C.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And our practice has really grown beyond simple litigation. Well, I shouldn't say simple, but beyond litigation. We, about around the late 80s, we added our intelligence project. That's the project we're most known for in terms of tracking and monitoring hate and extremist groups. And then we added our teaching tolerance program. That project provides free resources to K-12 educators on an array of anti-bias topics.
Oh, great. Excellent. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other things that you guys are involved with? Prison reform, any recent wins that you guys have been involved in? I know reading last night, just really incredible, some of the work that's being done now.
Yes, I want to just shout out my colleagues. They're doing incredible work across any number of areas. Our litigation really has moved into a couple of different practice groups, a number of different practice groups. We have our children's rights group. We have our economic justice, immigration, and anti-LGBTQ or anti-LGBTQ rights and special litigation, in addition to criminal justice reform. We, right now, in the COVID reality, we've been doing a lot of work with people who are incarcerated or detained in very unsafe facilities, as you can imagine. If you can think for yourself about, myself, I'm still pretty much sheltering in place. And certainly people that are detained or incarcerated have nowhere to go. So we filed a number of lawsuits across our southern states and have been successful in getting a number of people released from detention and back home with their families so that they can take care of their health. We have a huge and ongoing lawsuit against the state of Alabama right now, the Alabama Department of Corrections. I believe we're going into our 3rd year. It's huge. Some of your folks the viewers may be familiar with this case. The judge ruled that the prisons in Alabama are unconstitutional and just horrendous. They're overcrowded, they're unsafe, they're dangerous, they're violent. We filed suit on behalf of people who are currently incarcerated there for the lack of mental health services, for the lack of all kinds of health and human services. And so that litigation is ongoing. We go back to trial in September. We won on the first part of the case relative to our suit on mental health claims, and so we'll continue that and insist that Alabama do something about the way it incarcerates human beings.
That, in a past lifetime, I actually worked in the California state prisons, and I can't imagine what COVID is doing right now in those environments and in those very, very close quarters. And, it's not a good situation to start with, and here we are with COVID. That said, my next question, very significant moment in time here. We have got the COVID thing, which, here in California, we're basically back down into shelter in place. So long everything. And it's very difficult. But also, the larger awareness of Black Lives Matter, the fight for racial equality. How significant is this for you guys? And how is this really affecting the way you work as an organization?
Well, this moment in time is affecting all of us, and especially kind of the folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center and people who are engaged in social justice work and have been for some time. We can see it as a positive. I certainly do. I feel like people are understanding sometimes for the first time what we mean by systemic racism or institutional oppression or anti-Black racism. These are concepts that people are at least beginning to inquire about and seeking to understand what they mean. I think that it goes back to COVID. Interestingly enough, we were able to see as the pandemic spread, we were able to note that there were tremendous disparities with respect to who caught the virus and who was dying from the virus. And we're not surprised at all to note that Black and brown people are disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic. And if I could just put kind of this movement or this moment in the movement in perspective, I think about COVID. I think about those early calls to end shelter in place, where we saw armed militia take over state governments in Michigan and other places across the country. Again, aware that certain segments of the population were more susceptible to the virus than others, and then others just wanting to lift the shelter in place orders. Then right on the heels of that, we were made aware, of the vigilante killing of Mr. Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And I said made aware because we didn't find out until 2 months after he was killed that he was gunned down literally as he was, jogging, minding his own business in his own neighborhood. What we came to learn and understand is that the two people who killed him were immediately released. And if not for the video showing what happened, and the call on the part of people in the community and across the country that they wouldn't be arrested to this day. So that happened, and people of color, Black people in particular, began to fill the streets and protest around his death and the lack of justice in that case. Then too soon after that, we have the shooting of Breonna Taylor in her own home. And so this really got people out of their homes and in the streets in ways that we hadn't seen in a long time. And then, of course, the lynching, the horrendous lynching, public lynching of Mr. Floyd was just too much. And that just put everyone kind of like on the street. So I think with what we saw with that is what we have seen in the past with respect to kind of these really heinous, just awful acts of inhumanity, where people mobilize, people who are impacted, people who are targeted by police violence, and people who are not. Anyone who saw that video can easily understand that he was murdered, right? That police violence is something that is out of control within this country. So people took to the street, not just Black people in defense of Black lives, but people, a multi-generational, multiracial, multicultural group of people just began to demand justice. And this moment in our movement is continuing. I think it's important to give credit to the early organizers of the Black Lives Matters movement, and remember when it started, and remember that it has continued to this day, right? So the fact that people were and continue to be mobilized across the country is because of the work that they've been doing all these years, and the fact that we've been engaging communities in conversations in talks about Black lives and police violence. So this moment in time is really encouraging, in that I think that people are beginning to pay attention, and more importantly, beginning to act.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's imperative. And building on that, one of the things that I would love your perspective on is, what as individuals can we do to help? And also something that's near and dear to my heart is how as a company can we help? And what do we do, both, as our individual persons and our family, but also as a company? This is something that's very, very important to us. It's something Litify is very committed to, working with these different causes and different organizations. How can we best have impact?
Well, I think I know that the individual and the company, they're connected, right? Where individuals make up the company. And so let me answer the first part of the question first, that we stay in the conversation, right? We stay in it beyond our comfort level. I would say to the viewers right now, if you're becoming uncomfortable at the talk of systemic racism, as I mentioned, systemic racism, or if I mentioned white supremacy culture or anti-Black racism, if terms like that make you uncomfortable, I'm asking you to lean into it and to listen, to really engage in authentic and vulnerable conversation with the people around you. Begin to talk about it and unpack what is going on around us. Have conversations, and now I'm talking to white folks, and have conversations with yourselves, right? Don't ask people of color, Black people, to explain what's happening. Start some conversations with yourself, because you can and should begin to unpack how you're feeling, how it's landing on you, what you see, what you don't see, what you don't understand. There are resources everywhere. And it's interesting, we read about how kind of all the anti-racist books are like out of stock now because people are ordering them, and that's great, that's fantastic. And so I would say that we continue to engage with one another, continue to educate ourselves, stay in the conversation, stay in it, and really consider yourself a part of the change. Recognize that people are in real pain. People have expressed real hurt and real pain, and that's real. And so to believe what people share with you, to believe your eyes when you see acts of violence perpetrated against Black and Indigenous or people of color, that you begin to put it together, like, I think something is happening here, and then ask yourself what you can do about it.
Yeah, the change comes from within. Absolutely.
That's right.
I think that's right. What's been told to me, and I think
that's right.
thing that we've been told is listen. You need to listen, and listen openly. And you're right. Lead into the conversations. It's very important that is what happens.
And bring that same sense of inquiry into your company, right?
Oh,
the conversation shouldn't stop at your computer at the door, because now you're Litify. We're all, we're a microcosm of society wherever it is that we work or live.
Yeah. And we do remain very committed to these issues. We are doing all sorts of internal programs that are going to be ongoing. We're doing charitable contribution matches to social justice organizations. Litify.org, which is our charitable arm of the company, is very much based in social justice. So we work with a lot of different social justice organizations, including yourselves as well. And, we're just really educating ourselves and really trying to, make a sustainable path versus just something that's just for the moment versus, something that's going to be long lasting. Changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about some of the voter suppression. You're working very hard to raise awareness on this. And I just was wondering how COVID is exacerbating the voter suppression throughout the country, what you are doing to potentially address that, and again, what can we possibly do to help?
Hmm. Well, I'm sure that everyone is familiar with the images that first came out of Wisconsin and then came more recently out of Georgia. There's long lines and people in masks, people literally risking their personal health to exercise the right to vote. And it shouldn't be that way. We should be making it as easy as possible for everyone to be able to exercise this right to vote. So some of the things that the Southern Poverty Law Center is doing is suing. You know, we're litigating against secretaries of state, insisting that there are more ways for people to vote, that absentee ballots, and this might sound like a foreign concept to you in California, that to realize that you can't just automatically get an absentee ballot or vote from home, because, you know, in states like California have been doing it forever. But in states like Alabama and in Louisiana, where we've sued the Secretary of State, you have to have, in Louisiana, you have to have a witness sign your absentee ballot form, and in Alabama, you have to, you know, take it and bring your ID and get it all in advance and have an excuse as to why you need to have an absentee ballot. And we're saying that especially it's too onerous anyway. It should just be open, we believe. But in this time of COVID, we should be making it possible for everyone to participate by mail-in vote or in-person vote. And if we're going to have in-person vote, we're going to insist that they be safe places for people to vote, and that there be more polling places. We saw the lines in Georgia. We have partners in the field that people were in line for 4 hours. That is ridiculous on any given day, but especially again in this time of COVID-19. So we'll continue to pressure secretaries of state to expand the ways that people can vote safely. And then we're doing some other things in connection with expanding the right to vote. It's not even expanding the right to vote. It's like working against voter suppression. Some people think that voter suppression is one or two things, but it really is. You could count the lack of absentee ballot or mail-in ballots or drop-in ballots as a tool of voter suppression. What another tool of voter suppression is preventing people, returning citizens, we call them people who have former felony convictions, who have paid their debt to society and completed their time, but are prevented from voting. You may be aware that in 2018 in Florida, Amendment 4 was passed by an overwhelming majority of citizens in that state that reinstated the right to vote for up to 1.2 million people. And this is what the citizens of Florida said, that we want returning citizens to be able to vote. Well, immediately after that, the Florida legislator tried to block that and wanted to institute a requirement that people had to pay their fines and fees before they would be able to vote. And Governor DeSantis, co-signed on that. So we have sued the governor and said that this amounts to nothing short of a poll tax. You cannot require payment of fees in exchange for the right to vote. So we were successful in that appeal just a couple of months ago, and we brought suit on behalf of some African American women, very courageous women in Florida, who, as I say, had paid their debt to society, but were unable to vote. We have to remember when you require something like the payment of fees to people who have been recently released from prison, where do we expect them to get this money? How do we expect them to get this money? So what we argued is that what with racial discrimination and gender discrimination, African American women were not in a position to be able to pay these extraneous fines and fees in order to secure the right to vote. We won on the issue of the poll tax, if you will, but we did not win on the racial discrimination charge. But we'll continue.
Yeah, really, just incredible work that you guys are doing. Do you anticipate all these things that are happening in the United States, with people in lines and the images that people are seeing across the internet and across the television? Do you hope that it's going to lead to a lasting change, that we're going to continue to sort of have these, really huge turnouts to vote and these really, very, very kind of divisive times, for lack of a better word?
Well, let me speak to the voting first. We're going to certainly do all we can at the Southern Poverty Law Center to make it possible for everyone to participate. We're also doing a tremendous push. We just launched a Vote Your Voice initiative that's putting $30 million behind our voting efforts. We hope to support as many community partners across our 5 states and get out the voter registration and get out the vote drives, because we know that people who we call them low propensity voters, people who haven't voted in recent elections, or people who have never been asked to vote, we're going to go and find those people, and we want to bring people into the electoral process. So we're going to do all we can to ensure that voter turnout continues to be high across these southern states. And then in terms of the change, we were seeing change already. Again, I don't want to downplay that. It's just a matter of how long we're going to continue these efforts. I often say that this thing that happened with NASCAR on their own, prohibiting the Confederate flag from flying at the raceway. I mean, that's on their own. That's like a miracle. That's like that just speaks volumes of the change that's happening. And now look at the Washington football team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these kinds of things, they're victories. We should count them as victories, and not unrelated to the hard work that people across communities have been doing for years, right? And so we should take comfort in the fact that our hard work is paying off. Didn't just happen that people thought, or companies thought, oh, I should do this. It's because we were out there day after day, year after year, stressing these things. So we're seeing real change happen. We're seeing it happen at the federal level, maybe not with the current administration, but with respect to Confederate iconography. We're encouraged that the Armed Services Committee, against the president's wishes, continues to look at changing the names of 10 military installations that are named after so-called Confederate leaders. That action is moving forward. Just in Montgomery, and here in Montgomery, Alabama, the school board voted just last night to rename 3 high schools in Montgomery that are named after, Jeff Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Lanier. And so this is something that the community has been working towards for years, and now it happened. So we're seeing some real substantive change now.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so much. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed at all the good that's being done. I want to circle back to prison reform for a little bit. Just in kind of doing my research, I was shocked at the number of requests that you guys get just even monthly from individuals who are incarcerated asking for help. Can you talk a little bit about this and how you help? And I understand that you have to look at you have to look at everything and all the cases that come in and all the requests that come in. I believe just even on a monthly, and correct me if I'm wrong with the number, you almost get 10,000 requests monthly for help from incarcerated individuals in our country. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think just take that in for a moment. 10,000 requests coming to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and that's duplicated in other social justice law firms across the country as well. I think it really speaks to the desperation that people are feeling, people that are incarcerated. It's it's a cry for help, for sure. Typically people are talking about conditions of confinement, and that they're unsafe, or they're unhealthy, or they're in violent circumstances. Yes, sure, people talk about the fact that they believe that they've been incarcerated unjustly, but that is a minority of the correspondence that we receive. Really, people want to be treated like human beings, and they're telling us that they're not being treated like human beings in inside our prisons. I will talk a little bit about our program, the Immigrant Justice Program. It's called the Southeast Immigrant Freedom Initiative, which really works to help people who are being detained in immigrant detention facilities. And we don't often talk about that. Sometimes, we talk about the news is directed towards the border, and we see what's happening on the border. But the fact of the matter is that there are these independent, private detention facilities across the country, and they're scattered across the Deep South in very remote areas, and intentionally remote areas, we would say. So we noticed this happening a few years ago, and what we decided to do is that we'll put small offices and staff near those detention facilities. People would be detained, say in Jackson, Mississippi. We had a client who was detained in Jackson, Mississippi, then taken to a remote facility, in Louisiana, where their family didn't even know where they were. They essentially disappeared. So there's a lack of support and advocacy for people who are being held in immigrant detention. So we get a lot of correspondence from them as well. We're trying to represent as many people as we can in immigration hearings, because the fact of the matter is that people who are represented in detention hearings are more likely to get released. And when they're not, if you have never seen, this is one of the most inhumane things that I've ever seen, is a hearing in immigrant detention. People are literally lined up, chained together, and they have 2 minutes to state their name. And then they're guilty, right? And no representation whatsoever for the most part. So there are cries from these individuals who are asking for help. There's also, of course, COVID-related concerns in immigrant detention, just like they are in the larger state prisons across the country. So we do hear a lot from them, and it's really heartbreaking that we're unable to help as many people as we would like to. The need is so great. It's so great. And it's good to have partners across the country who are helping us do that. I don't want to at all give the impression that it's just SPLC. There are people across the country who care and are doing their best. We just need more help and more support.
Yeah. I was just blown away at the numbers. I was just, and again, my brief time in the prisons and the way things ran and the way people were treated. And, I was in there offering education. We were doing education classes and college credits and things like that. I think the word that when I think about it was just desperation.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the college programs, because that's one of the things that we know research shows that reduces violence, improves morale. It's just the right thing to do, and we don't seem to even want to do that. Yeah, these are human beings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they've gone through, and they've they made mistakes, and everybody's got an individual course, obviously. But I mean, when you're 17 and you went in and you made a big mistake, and you're 40 and you're trying to get your college degree, and with no hope of anything else, you're just going to get a college degree and you're going to stay there. It's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. These guys were just desperate. I just to this day can clearly see these images of trying to help their own cause, because they weren't getting help from anywhere else. So very impactful. Left an impression. Probably why I'm helping with charitable causes and trying to do good and do better and be better. So.
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
it makes a difference. It makes a difference. What each of us do makes a difference.
I'm gonna, be personal for a minute and shout out to my parents. My parents very much just encouraged us to give back and be better and do better by people. And everybody's equal. Everybody's treated equal. You be nice. You be kind. So that was very important to us growing up, and here we are. Fascinating conversation. How does all this intersect? Voter suppression, police brutality, mass incarceration. How does this all sort of intersect in terms of, just the nation, the world, SPLC?
That's a really interesting question. In my mind, I went to intersecting or interlocking systems of oppression. right? Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative often talks about, reckoning with our history, and our history is one of oppression, right? Beginning with our treatment of indigenous peoples, and our, kind of genocide against people who lived here. And our systems of oppression that play out with respect to race and gender, and class all stem from that, right? And so if we need to really look at that and look at it with fresh eyes, and not saying, some people would say, well, it's our history and we should be proud of it. Certainly, but there are things that we can look at and say that wasn't right, and we don't want to operate in that way again, right? We as a people, as a culture, can look at and reckon with our history and determine and decide to do better and be better, as you said, as your mother said, right? Yeah. So we don't have to do things the way we've always done things. We can do things differently. We can lift up one another. We can make it possible for equity to be realized across all of our lines of difference. We can do that. We can take care of one another. We can lift. We can end racial disparities in healthcare. We can end racial disparities in education. But we have to look at it and acknowledge that it exists, that there's a problem. If we don't acknowledge that there's a problem, then how are we going to fix it? There's been a lot of talk and focus recently on the wealth gap between Black folks and white folks. And people are beginning to see, like, oh my God, well, why hasn't that changed? Well, it is not because, there's some unique dysfunction in Black families. It is because of the way things were set up. This is the legacy of the enslavement of African Americans, and I would add the legacy of the genocide against indigenous peoples. It's no coincidence that you find groups of people that continue to be on the lower end of the economic scale. So those things, that everything connects up with kind of that history, with our history, and it's up to us to reckon with it, untangle it, and purpose to do better. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And you can, and you just try. You just have to try. Be open and try. You'll go online or the Facebook and you see all these memes about, oh God, 2020. Oh, I can't wait for it to be over. It never started. 2021, and oh gosh, and everybody's complaining about their hair and all this, right? But more importantly, to me, 2020, I think, is something that is really, to me, is change. Is 2020 sort of the younger generation civil rights movement?
Well, I think it belongs to all of us. But before I go into what I'm really happy about, or what I'm hopeful about with respect to 2020, it's important to acknowledge all the loss. What are we coming up on 135,000 people who have died as a result of the COVID-19 virus, in their families, and some that weren't even able to see them in the early days of the pandemic, when family members weren't even able to say goodbye. I mean, it's awful. And to this day, people are not able to say goodbye and have funerals, or kind of the loss around that, the loss around ritual, family being together. There's some real things to mourn, and I want to acknowledge that. There's some real pain. There are certainly some positives that come out of it, and that was true in the civil rights movement. You look at the civil rights movement, there were gains made. People's lives were taken, and some significant gains were made. We're seeing that repeat again, and I say that it's our movement, or the movement is, we all collectively benefit from the movement. I think it's also important to note that all movements that advance social justice are led by young people, and that's not just domestically, not just in the United States, but we see that across the globe, and that is really how change happens. And thankfully, because the older we get, the less likely we are to want to participate in the hard work of making that change happen. So I have deep gratitude to everyone who puts themselves on the front line and has been insistent on getting our attention and keeping our attention. And I'm grateful.
We are too. Very grateful. My nieces have taken up the torch, and just amazing young women that are doing amazing things. And so I agree. The generation. Kind of our last question: what changes and reforms do you hope to see? SPLC hopes to see in the next 5 years. What would you guys like to see in the landscape in the next 5 years?
If we continue kind of this forward momentum, we can do a lot in 5 years. We can seriously reduce the incarceration rate in this country that is completely, I think everyone agrees, it's completely out of control. So there will be serious movement with respect to decarceration. With that, hand in hand with that, we would have come to a better, more humane way to undertake public safety, that the way we depend upon police and what we depend upon police to do would have dramatically changed, that we invest in and take advantage of skilled mental health workers, social workers, and not only in communities and with respect to community safety, but in schools, that we move away from school resource officers or armed police in our schools, that looks much different, that we'll begin to see equitable outcomes with respect to educational attainment. We'll see that, and we'll see some improvement in the social safety net that feels permanent, because we just go up and down in terms of helping people who are in desperate need. But we need to put some things into place that really begin to provide some structure and foundation for people to move out of generational poverty. It's not enough to, although it's great, not enough to increase the unemployment benefit to $600, $600 or whatever, and then take it away, right? Yeah. We have to do. There's some things that we need to set in place more permanently. So so I think around the criminal justice reform thing, I think we'll begin to see some reform, and we'll see a reduction in the number of people that we incarcerate. Oh my gosh, we would have had some major movement with respect to immigration reform. That DACA students, no one lives in fear of being deported, and I believe that we can do that within 5 years.
Wow, incredible. Lecia, can't thank you enough for joining us today. Such important issues, and we thank you so much for taking the time of your very busy schedule to sit and chat with us here at Litify. If those of you want to share this broadcast, we will have a copy up on our litify.com website. Please feel free to subscribe to YouTube to join us. Also, we have a Slack community that talks about different issues and things happening in the legal tech industry. Feel free to join that as well. We'll have a lot of upcoming episodes and hope to have more like these moving forward. Lecia Brooks, Chief of Staff, Southern Poverty Law Center. We love you. What can we say?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, please stay safe out there and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.